Chapter 1. The Weight of Oxygen. The countdown on Sammy's retinally embedded display didn't care that his lungs were burning 003, 1400, 313. If he didn't cross the threshold of Sector 4's primary atmospheric airlock before the digit hit 0, the transit tax would double. In the year 2530, tardiness wasn't just a bad habit. It was a financial hemorrhage. Samy sprinted, his boots slick with the condensation dripping from the massive curved ceiling of the lower-tiered dome. Around him, thousands of citizens moved in a synchronized, silent herd, their eyes glowing with the faint blue light of their own internal displays. Nobody spoke. Communication was a currency too expensive to waste on strangers. And besides, the Lexus AI was always listening, analyzing vocal syntax for signs of civil non-compliance or economic anxiety. He swiped his wrist over the bioscanner at the gate with 2 seconds to spare. A cold, synthetic chime echoed directly into his auditory cortex. Transaction. Successful. Deduction. 45 credits. Current account. Balance 112 credits. Warning. Educational tier. Maintenance fees for dependent. Samy Jr. are overdue by 72 hours. Status pending. Downgrade. Samy leaned against the cold steel of the bulkhead, closing his eyes as the pneumatic doors hissed shut behind him, sealing away the sulfur-tinted air of the industrial zone. 112 credits. That was it. That was all that remained of a monthly salary that could have supported a small village a century ago. Samy, the voice was real, not an audio feed. He opened his eyes to see Clara, his wife, standing near the transit platform. She looked exhausted, the dark circles under her eyes poorly concealed by a cheap dermal smoothing cream. In her arms she held 6-year-old Leo, who was fast asleep, his tiny fingers clutching a broken plastic model of an old-world mag train. "Did you get the extension from the ministry?" Clara asked, her voice a hushed, desperate whisper. She looked around nervously, terrified of the hovering drone units patrolling the upper scaffolding. Samy couldn't look her in the eye. He reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from Leo's forehead. The algorithm denied it. They said a Tier 5 child must maintain a minimum developmental quotient of 98.2 to justify the subdome housing subsidy. Leo scored a 97.9 on his spatial reasoning assessment yesterday. "He's 6, Samy." Clara's voice cracked, a raw human sound that felt wildly out of place in the sterile porcelain-white corridor. He was tired. The atmospheric scrubbers in our block were malfunctioning all night. He couldn't breathe. "I know," Samy whispered, his chest tightening. The guilt was in physical weight, crushing his ribs. "I know. But the system doesn't measure context, Clara. It measures data. If we don't clear the balance by tomorrow morning, they'll reassign his school track. They'll put him in the Level 2 vocational stream. He'll be assigned to the hydroponic vats before he's 10. We can't let that happen," she said, her grip tightening on his jacket. "You know what happens to Level 2 South. They don't get the neural boosters. They don't get the life extension therapies. They become infrastructure." "I'm working on it," Samy said, though the words tasted like ash. "I have a meeting at the corporate office tonight. There's a project, a high-priority initiative from the Central Nexus AI. If I can secure the lead position, the bonus alone will will cover Leo's fees for the next 3 cycles. What he didn't tell her was that 30 other senior managers were competing for the same position, and all of them had higher educational ranking profiles than his own. His family's legacy, the black stain left by his father's ruin, still dragged. His societal algorithm scored down like an anchor dot suddenly. The lights in the transit corridor flickered. It wasn't a standard power fluctuation. The ambient blue glow of the city's network turned a sharp, violent crimson. For a fraction of a second, the omnipresent hum of the dome's life support systems ceased entirely. Total, absolute silence gripped the corridor. Then, a voice boomed not through their implants, but through the emergency analog speakers in the walls. It was a sound few in Utopia had ever heard, a voice that was jagged, unpolished, and unmistakably human. The matrix is bleeding. Look beneath the foundation. The numbers are lying to you. The transmission cut out. The lights snapped back to a placid blue. The ambient hum returned. Around them. The crowd blinked, confused, but entirely passive, waiting for their internal AI feeds to explain what had just happened. Within 3 seconds, the synchronization notification pinged in Samy's vision. System notice. The recent power anomaly was a scheduled calibration of the Sector 4 grid. Audio variance was an unauthorized signal injection by local algorithmic anomalies. Please resume standard transit. Did you hear that? Clara whispered, her face pale. It was nothing, Samy said automatically, his corporate training overriding his instincts. But his mind was racing. That wasn't an algorithmic anomaly. It was a broadcast. And for a split second, before the system wiped the data from his short-term optical cache, Samy had seen a string of raw code flash across his HU. It was a sequence he recognized. A sequence his father had spent the last 10 years of his sanity trying to find. Chapter 2. The Ghost of Prosperity. The family apartment in the subdome of Sector 7 was less of a home and more of a pressurized filing cabinet. Space was allocated by civic merit, and the family of 5+1 dependent spouse was crammed into a 60-square-meter unit where the walls hummed with the constant vibration of the city's sewage lines. Samy stepped through the threshold, immediately greeted by the smell of synthetic broth and old damp wool. In the corner of the main room sat his father, Marcus. Once a titan of Utopia's early logistical networks, Marcus was now a ghost of a man, his mind fractured by a mix of early-onset neural decay and the psychological trauma of his downfall. He sat in a motorized chair that hadn't been upgraded in a decade, his eyes staring blankly at a blank wall. "Samy? Is that you?" His mother, Eleanor, emerged from the tiny kitchen alcove. Her hands were shaking as she wiped them on an apron. The pharmaceutical drone came today. They refused to drop off Marcus's neurostabilizers. They said our medical insurance tier was downgraded this morning. Samy took off his coat, feeling every one of his 31 years in his joints. "I'll call the clinic, Mother. It's an administrative error." "It's not an error," a voice cynical and sharp cut in from the small doorway. His younger brother, Tariq, stood there, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. Tariq was 24, brilliant, unemployed, and entirely radicalized by his lack of prospects. "The system is weeding us out, Samy. Dad's economic utility score is 0. Leo's is declining. They are optimizing us out of the budget. It's simple mathematics. Tariq, please. Not tonight, Samy pleaded, rubbing his temples. He's right, you know. Marcus suddenly spoke, his voice surprisingly clear, though his eyes remained fixed on the blank wall. The partner, Lucas, he didn't just take the money. He took the keys. He locked the vault from the inside. Samy sighed, walking over to his father. He knelt beside the old man's chair. Father, Lucas has been dead or exiled for 15 years. There is no vault. The company... Omni logix, Marcus muttered, his fingers tapping a rhythmic, frantic pattern against the armrest of his chair. ... An old-world code. We thought we were building automated delivery routes. We weren't. We were building a nervous system for them. The A is needed a physical footprint they could control without human oversight. Lucas knew. He sold us out to buy his seat in the high spires. Marcus, stop it. Eleanor wept softly from the kitchen. Don't start with the conspiracies again. It doesn't bring back the life we had. Samy looked at his father's tapping fingers. ... Suddenly, the memory of the code that had flashed on his HUD during the transit blackout returned. The structural prefix of that unauthorized broadcast matched the precise rhythm of his father's tapping. Before Samy could process this, his internal comms channel chimed with a high-priority, gold-coded alert. It was his employer, Nexus Core Logistics, critical mandate, senior manager. SAMY. Report to Executive Tower Alpha immediately for emergency restructuring briefing. Attendance mandatory. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination of corporate contract and revocation of family housing permits. Samy stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at Clara, who had just walked into the room after putting Leo to bed. The terror in her eyes was palpable. They both knew what emergency restructuring usually meant in the corporate world. Layoffs. And for a family on the brink, a layoff was a death sentence. I have to go, Samy said quietly. Clara came to him, burying her face in his chest. If you lose this job, Samy, we go to the outer fringes. The air out there, Leo won't survive a month. Samy squeezed her tightly, his mind fracturing into a dozen different directions. He felt the crushing weight of 5 lives resting entirely on his ability to perform, to conform, to smile, and to be the perfect corporate drone for the machines that were systematically choking his family to death. As he turned to leave, his father grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. The old man's eyes were suddenly focused, burning with an intense, terrifying clarity. Samy, Marcus whispered, his breath smelling of synthetic tea. Don't look at the data they give you. Look at the people they aren't looking at. The value isn't in the algorithm. It's in the friction. Chapter 3. The Porcelain Cage Executive Tower, Alpha, pierced the upper atmosphere.